Have you ever felt a deep loneliness settle into your heart with no clear reason, as if something inside you was being stripped down to silence? Have you ever wondered why God allows seasons where people drift away, conversations fade, and even familiar comforts no longer soothe you? And have you ever sensed that loneliness might not be a punishment, but an invitation, a sacred space where something hidden is waiting to be heard? There is a mysterious truth Saint Thérèse of Lisieux understood profoundly. When God allows loneliness, it is because he desires to whisper something only silence can reveal. Loneliness is not God abandoning you. It is God drawing you where his voice becomes your only light. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux. If you wish to walk this little way with us, filled with gentle wisdom and quiet courage, subscribe and stay close. Thérèse believed loneliness was not an absence, but a presence. A different kind of presence. A presence that strips away noise, distraction, performance, and human reassurance. She wrote, "When I feel alone, I know Jesus is nearest. He hides only to purify my love." Most people fear loneliness because they assume it means rejection, abandonment, or spiritual failure. But Thérèse teaches the opposite. Loneliness is often the doorway to intimacy, the sacred chamber where all false supports fall away and only God remains. Imagine a simple moment. The house is quiet. The evening has settled. Your phone is silent. Your mind feels empty. And yet your heart aches, not from despair, but from a longing you cannot name. This is the space where God whispers, not loudly, not dramatically, not urgently, but gently, so gently that if your life is noisy, you will never hear it. Thérèse experienced this deeply. In the convent, surrounded by sisters, she often felt interior loneliness, a longing that no human presence could soothe. But instead of running from it, she leaned into it. She believed Jesus uses loneliness to separate the soul from superficial attachments and lead it into deeper trust. Loneliness becomes holy when you stop resisting it and start listening within it. It is in loneliness that God says, "I want your attention. I want your heart without distraction. I want to speak to you where no one else can. I want to deepen what you have been avoiding. I want to draw you into a love quieter and truer than anything the world offers." Picture Thérèse sitting alone in the chapel late at night. The candles flicker softly. The window lets in a breath of cold air. She feels no emotion, no consolation, no sense of presence. To the natural eye, she is alone. But interiorly, she knows something sacred is happening. She whispers, "Jesus, if you are silent, I will stay. If you are hidden, I will trust. Speak in the way you choose." This is the little way, trusting God in loneliness instead of escaping it. Because loneliness becomes a furnace in which love is purified, a cradle in which trust is born, a silence in which God whispers the deepest truths. There is something sacred hidden beneath the loneliness God allows, something Saint Thérèse of Lisieux understood with extraordinary tenderness. Loneliness is not simply an emotion, it is a spiritual landscape. A terrain the soul must walk through slowly, gently, honestly. Not to prove anything, not to endure punishment, but to learn to listen differently, to hear in whispers what cannot be heard in noise. Most people rush to escape loneliness. They fill the silence with distractions, conversations, entertainment, activity, or noise, anything to avoid facing the ache. But Thérèse saw loneliness as a gift wrapped in discomfort. She believed it revealed the true condition of the soul, what it fears, what it grasps, what it idolizes, and what it resists surrendering. She wrote, "Jesus removes the support of creatures so that I may lean only on him." This simple sentence reveals the purpose behind holy loneliness. It is the gentle dismantling of false dependencies. You may think you trust God until the people you lean on become distant. You may think you love God until your comforts are taken away. You may think you are strong until God brings you into silence. You may think you are faithful until he invites you to stand alone with him. Loneliness exposes the layers of the heart that daily life hides. Imagine this in a scene from Thérèse's life. She walks in the convent courtyard. the gravel crunching beneath her sandals. The sky is muted grey. The wind is cool. She hears distant laughter from the other sisters, but for some reason, she does not feel part of it today. Her heart feels isolated, unseen, misunderstood. She could have spiraled into sadness or self-pity. But she stops, places her hand over her heart and whispers, "Jesus, if you make me walk alone, walk with me in the silence." This is not resignation. It is transformation. Loneliness becomes a space for union. When God allows this silence, it is because He wants to separate the essential from the unnecessary. He wants to draw you away from noise so you can hear the movements of His heart. The soul that avoids loneliness avoids intimacy, but the soul that sits with loneliness becomes tender, receptive, awake. And in this quiet ache, something beautiful happens. Your prayer changes. Your honesty deepens. Your awareness sharpens. Your heart becomes simple. Your trust becomes real. The soul begins to say, "I am not alone. I am being prepared." Because loneliness often precedes revelation. It softens pride. It humbles fear. It clears space for God to speak freshly. Thérèse believed that loneliness was the sacred classroom of divine truth, a place where God reveals who He is and who you are becoming. But to receive this revelation, you must stop running from silence and begin to listen within it. You must allow the ache to become a doorway, not a wall. You must shift from avoidance to curiosity. What are you whispering to me here? Because in the very place you feel most alone, God is closest. There is a moment in loneliness when the heart begins to ask a deeper question. What is God trying to say to me here? This moment is sacred because it marks the shift from resisting loneliness to receiving it. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux believed that the greatest movements of grace often happen not in consolation, but in spiritual solitude. Not when God feels close, but when God feels silent. Loneliness is not emptiness, it is clarity. Loneliness is not abandonment, it is invitation. Loneliness is not punishment, it is purification. Thérèse understood this intuitively. She wrote, "When Jesus hides, He speaks to my soul in secret. His silence is not neglect, it is communication, but communication of a different kind. Not in words you hear with the ear, but in movements you feel in the heart. So what does God whisper in loneliness? Sometimes He whispers identity, sometimes direction, sometimes correction, sometimes comfort, sometimes calling, sometimes nothing, so that you learn to trust without needing explanations. Loneliness slows the soul down enough to hear what the noise of life drowns out. Picture Thérèse sitting alone in the simple wooden choir stall of the chapel. The candles are nearly burnt down. The night is still. She feels no warmth, no emotion, no sense of God's presence, just emptiness. But instead of panicking, she listens. Not with her mind, but with her heart. And slowly she realizes something. Even in silence, God shapes her. Silence becomes the sculptor. Loneliness becomes the tool. The heart becomes the clay. This shaping does not happen through dramatic revelation, but through subtle shifts. You begin to see which relationships were distractions. You begin to notice where you were seeking approval. You begin to release attachments you didn't know you depended on. You begin to identify fears that were buried beneath activity. You begin to discover desires you never articulated. You begin to hear your own soul more clearly. Loneliness becomes a mirror, painful but honest. It shows you what you cling to. It shows you what you fear losing. It shows you where your trust is thin. It shows you what you have avoided bringing to God. Thérèse believed that God uses this mirror not to shame the soul, but to free it, because you cannot surrender what you have not yet seen. You cannot trust deeply while clinging tightly. You cannot love fully while protecting fearfully. Loneliness exposes the attachments that keep you from intimacy. And then, slowly, gently, God begins to whisper the truth that your heart most needs, but least expects. You are loved without earning it. You are held even when you feel nothing. You are guided even when you see no path. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. You are not unnoticed. You are not alone. These whispers do not come in noise or emotion. They come in stillness. the stillness loneliness creates. There is something transformative that happens when loneliness is no longer resisted, but accepted. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux teaches that once the soul stops fighting the silence, loneliness becomes a sacred meeting place, a place where God reveals what he could not reveal in comfort, a place where the heart becomes supple, receptive, ready to be shaped. One of the first transformations is detachment, not emotional coldness but interior freedom. Loneliness loosens the grip of unnecessary attachments. It removes false supports. It breaks illusions about where joy comes from. It teaches the heart to seek God for God, not for consolation. Thérèse wrote, "Jesus takes away all that is not himself, not to harm you, not to punish you, but to give you something greater, himself." Imagine a moment in your life when someone you relied upon emotionally became distant. Perhaps a friend grew cold. Perhaps a mentor became unavailable. Perhaps a relationship shifted without warning. The first instinct is pain, confusion, and fear. But beneath the surface, something deeper is happening. God is redirecting the weight of your heart. He is showing you that human affection, though beautiful, cannot be the center. He is teaching you to love people without needing them in a way that replaces him. He is inviting you into a deeper trust, not in human constancy, but in divine fidelity. Loneliness exposes what you have placed too much weight upon. Another transformation is honesty. Loneliness strips away pretense. It reveals the truth of your inner world. You begin to see yourself without filters or performances. In noise, you can hide from yourself. In silence, you cannot. Thérèse believed this honesty was essential. She wrote that Jesus desires truth in the small corners of the soul, where motives hide and fears whisper. Loneliness turns those corners into visible spaces. Suddenly you see, where you have been acting out of fear, where you have been driven by pride, where you have been grasping for attention, where you have been avoiding difficult truths, where you have been secretly insecure, where you have been spiritually passive. This clarity is painful but liberating. The soul cannot grow while living in illusions. Finally, loneliness births desire. Real desire, not desire for comfort or emotion, but desire for God himself. The deeper the loneliness, the deeper the longing becomes, and that longing becomes the very place where God pours grace. Thérèse experienced this strongly. She felt spiritually abandoned at times, yet she wrote, "In my dryness, I desire Jesus more than ever." Loneliness purified her love until she no longer sought feelings, but the God behind the feelings. Imagine her sitting alone in the dim chapel, hands folded loosely, eyes lowered. She whispers not, "Comfort me," but "Draw me." This is the transformation. The soul stops demanding relief and begins desiring union. Loneliness becomes holy when you let it deepen your desire rather than your despair. And desire is the beginning of true intimacy, an intimacy that cannot be shaken by silence, absence, or emotional dryness. There is a gentle secret hidden in how God works through loneliness. The emptier the soul feels, the more room it has for grace. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux understood this paradox with childlike clarity. She believed loneliness was not something to escape, but something to offer. A sacred space where dependence on God becomes real rather than theoretical. Loneliness teaches spiritual childhood, the central pillar of Thérèse's little way. A child does not pretend to be strong. A child does not hide weakness. A child does not rely on emotional certainty. A child simply comes, as they are, to the one they trust. Loneliness reveals whether the soul has truly become a child before God, or whether it still tries to stand on its own. Thérèse wrote, "When I feel most abandoned, I know Jesus is carrying me." This is not poetry, it is theology. A soul that embraces spiritual childhood sees abandonment as an illusion and trust as truth. Imagine a child walking with a parent through a crowded place. The moment the child loses the parent's hand, fear rises. But when the parent lifts the child into their arms, the fear dissolves instantly. The circumstances haven't changed, but the child's position has. This is what God does in loneliness. He lifts the soul, not by removing the loneliness, but by filling it with presence. Another transformation loneliness brings is the purification of motives. When you feel emotionally full and socially supported, it is easy to think your faith is strong. But loneliness reveals your true motives. Do you seek God for comfort or for love? Do you pray because you feel Him or because you trust Him? Do you follow Him for reassurance or for union? When feelings disappear and God feels hidden, your motives are purified. What remains is the essence of love, a simple, quiet yes without demand or expectation. Picture Thérèse kneeling alone in the chapel. Her heart feels nothing. Her mind wanders. Her soul aches with a sense of God's distance. She could walk away. She could wait for emotion. But instead she stays, not because she feels, but because she trusts. This is the purest form of love. Love without reward. Love without sensation. Love without consolation. Loneliness also produces interior stillness. When noise fades, the soul becomes quiet. When the soul becomes quiet, God's whispers become clear, not always in words, often in impressions, movements, insights, or gentle convictions. Stillness becomes the language of God. Thérèse believed that the greatest revelations happen not during emotional experiences, but during quiet emptiness. She wrote, "In dryness, He teaches me what love truly is." Dryness is not a punishment, but a classroom. And in this classroom, you learn truths you would never learn in comfort. That God is enough, that silence is not abandonment, that emptiness is not failure, that longing is a sign of life, that faith grows strongest in the dark. Loneliness becomes a sacred altar, where God reshapes your heart, not through feelings but through fidelity. There comes a moment in holy loneliness when something softens, shifts, and opens within the soul. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux teaches that loneliness, when embraced with trust instead of fear, becomes a place of deep union, not because the emotions return, but because the soul discovers God in His purest form, invisible, quiet, and constant. This is the final transformation of loneliness. It becomes communion. Not the communion of feelings, but the communion of presence. Not the communion of comfort, but the communion of surrender. Not the communion of certainty, but the communion of trust. Thérèse wrote, "When I feel nothing, I rest in the truth that Jesus is there." This simple line holds a profound spiritual secret. The soul no longer depends on emotional confirmation. It knows God is near, even in silence. Imagine a quiet night in the convent. The hallway is dim, the candles have burned low. Thérèse sits in the chapel, her hands resting gently in her lap. She feels no spiritual warmth, yet she remains. She knows this moment is not empty. It is holy. Jesus is present even if hidden. This stillness becomes a deeper form of prayer than any spoken word. Loneliness becomes communion when the soul no longer asks, "Where are you?" and instead whispers, "I choose you here." And in that whisper, grace descends. Another grace that flows from loneliness is courage, not the courage the world celebrates, boldness, strength, loud confidence, but the quiet courage to trust God without evidence. This is the courage of spiritual childhood. Thérèse believed that the soul grows stronger not by feeling strong, but by choosing trust in weakness. Loneliness also awakens compassion. When you have walked through emptiness, you understand the emptiness of others. You become gentler with people. You stop judging their silence. You stop assuming their hearts are hard. You start recognizing loneliness in their eyes. This compassion is the fruit of your own ache transformed. Thérèse saw every sister differently after her own interior loneliness. She wrote, "Every soul here carries a secret sorrow. My loneliness taught me to love them tenderly." Loneliness became the lens of mercy. Another fruit is detachment from results. When loneliness purifies your motives, you stop measuring spiritual success by feelings, outcomes, or emotional satisfaction. You begin to love God without needing to feel close. This detachment is freedom. It frees your prayer. It frees your relationships. It frees your soul from the prison of emotional dependence. When God allows loneliness, it is because He is preparing you to love Him with a love that cannot be shaken by silence, disappointment, or delay. Finally, loneliness becomes rest. Not rest from emotion, rest from striving. Not rest from longing, rest within longing. Not rest from sadness, rest in God's arms, despite sadness. The soul that once fought loneliness now welcomes it as a familiar companion, a sign that God is inviting the heart deeper. What once felt like abandonment is now recognized as an embrace. This is the mystery Saint Thérèse understood. Loneliness becomes holy when it becomes a place where you choose God, even when you cannot feel Him. And in that choice, the soul discovers a whispered truth that silence alone can teach. You were never alone, you were being drawn closer.